We think of international sanctions as this clean, bloodless alternative to war, right? A way to apply pressure without firing a shot. But what happens when that pressure backfires? What if it creates a massive, multi-billion-dollar shadow economy, an underground system that ends up fueling corruption at home and, allegedly, terror abroad? Yeah, let's get into it.
So take a look at this number, $20 billion. That's the staggering amount one single state-owned bank is accused of laundering to help Iran get around those sanctions. I mean, it's a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around, but you've got to picture it as this giant river of dark money, just flowing silently right through the middle of the global financial system.
And look, we're not talking about some small-time back-alley operation here. This was a conspiracy that allegedly went all the way to the top. We're talking government officials, billionaire middlemen, and a major state-owned bank all in on it. It's this incredibly complex web of power, money, and pure influence.
So that leads to the two really big questions here, right? Where did all this money actually come from? And maybe even more important, what was it used for? Because when you start to follow that $20 billion trail, you see how a system that was designed to stop a country's dangerous ambitions might have actually ended up paying for them.
All right, so to really get how this all worked, you've got to understand the guys who are right at the center of it all. We're talking about two billionaire middlemen who are basically the human faces of this whole massive operation. And their stories, well, their very, very different fates tell you everything you need to know about just how high the stakes were.
Okay, so on one hand, you've got Babak Zanjani. He's this Iranian tycoon, and his job was basically to sell Iran's oil on the black market to get around the sanctions. But he ends up getting sentenced to death in his own country for embezzlement. Then you've got this guy Reza Zarrab, an Iranian-Turkish gold trader who was running the whole money laundering network. But what happens to him? He gets caught and ends up becoming a star witness for the US government. So, how in the world do two guys, partners in the same massive scheme, end up in such wildly different places? One's facing execution, and the other is in witness protection. It's wild.
Well, the answer really begins with why this whole scheme even existed in the first place. And it all comes down to the absolutely crippling pressure of international sanctions. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture here.
So what are we even talking about when we say economic sanctions? What are they, really? Well, you can kind of think of them as a form of economic warfare. The whole goal is to basically cut a country off from the rest of the world's economy. You restrict their trade, you block their access to money, and you do it all to try and force their leaders to change course.
And for Iran, man, this pressure has been building up for decades. I mean, it goes all the way back to 1979. But for the story we're telling today, the real turning point is 2012. That's when the US and the EU just slammed Iran's most vital industries. We're talking its central bank and its oil exports. All of a sudden, Iran's main moneymaker was frozen solid. They were effectively cut off from the world, and they were absolutely desperate for cash.
And when a country is that desperate, someone always steps in to fill the vacuum. In this case, it was one of the most powerful and feared organizations in the entire Middle East, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You'll hear them called the IRGC.
And this is so important to understand the mindset here. In 2011, Iran's supreme leader literally declared a year of economic jihad. Think about that phrasing. This wasn't just framed as business or economics. It was portrayed as a holy war, a sacred mission to fight back against Western pressure. Suddenly, breaking sanctions wasn't just a crime. It was a patriotic, almost religious duty.
And the IRGC? They were perfectly positioned to lead this jihad. You have to understand, they aren't just a military force. No, they're a full-blown economic empire. They control huge parts of the economy. Oil and gas, construction, telecommunications, banking and finance, and oh yeah, a $12 billion smuggling industry. So when all the official doors were slammed shut, the IRGC's back doors became the country's new lifeline.
Okay, so this brings us right back to our two middlemen, Zarrab and Zanjani, and the absolutely ingenious and totally illegal scheme they allegedly helped put together. So the big question is, how did they pull it off? How did they move billions and billions of dollars with the entire world supposedly watching?
Well, it was actually a pretty classic money laundering technique, just blown up to a massive international scale. Okay, so follow the money here. Step 1, Iran sells its oil to Turkey. The money for that oil gets deposited in a Turkish state bank, Halkbank. But here's the catch. It's frozen by sanctions. They can't touch it. That's where Zarrab comes in. That frozen money gets shuffled over to his network of fake front companies.
Then Zarab's companies would just create fake paperwork for ghost shipments of food or whatever, or they'd just use the money to buy a ton of gold. And for the final step, that gold gets smuggled to Dubai, where it's turned into untraceable cash, which is then funneled right back to the IRGC. It was a perfect, illegal loop.
But here's the thing, and this is so important to remember. This wasn't some victimless financial crime happening on paper. This shadow economy didn't just make a few powerful people rich. No, it had absolutely devastating real-world consequences, both for people inside Iran and for people thousands and thousands of miles away.
Take this for example. In May of 2022, this building, the Metropole Tower in Abadan, Iran, just collapsed. It killed at least 41 people, and that tragedy just sparked a firestorm of protests all over the country, with ordinary people blaming a system of just out-of-control corruption.
And here's the direct connection. It turns out the owner of that building had deep, deep ties to IRGC officials. He was allegedly allowed to completely ignore safety rules, illegally add extra floors. I mean, even the local governor admitted the building was erected on a foundation of corruption. And that's the kind of corruption that thrives on the exact type of off-the-books cash this whole sanctions-busting scheme created.
But the fallout didn't stop at Iran's borders, not even close. There's a U.S. lawsuit filed by the families of American soldiers and civilians that alleges that this very same laundered money, the gold for oil money, was used by the IRGC to fund its terrorist proxies over in Afghanistan. We're talking groups allied with al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
And this is where these abstract financial crimes get a very real, very tragic human face. This is Anne Smedingoff. She was a 25-year-old American diplomat. She was killed in a suicide bombing. She was delivering books to a school in Afghanistan.
And this is U.S. Army Specialist Kevin Cardoza. He was just 19 years old. He was killed by an IED. And what the lawsuit alleges is that the attacks that killed both of them were carried out by the same terror networks that got funding from the IRGC, funding that was made possible by this exact gold for oil scheme. So what are we left with? You have this really twisted cycle, right? You have sanctions that are supposed to stop bad behavior, but instead they create this massive shadow economy that actually enables it. It makes a corrupt system even more powerful and harder to fight. So let's see what happened to the main people involved in all this.
Yeah, the final scorecard here is, well, it's a mess. Reza Zarab, the guy who ran the network, he became the star witness, and he's free. The bank, Halk Bank, is still tied up in court here in the U.S., and Babak Zanjani, the guy sentenced to death in Iran, he might actually get released now that he's reportedly given his stolen money back to the government. So, yeah, justice in this story is complicated, to say the least.
And all of this really leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question. We use sanctions as our go-to weapon to deal with regimes we don't like. We think of them as this precise, powerful tool. But what if they're not? What if, in trying to box our enemies in, we're accidentally building them the perfect, lawless playground where they can do whatever they want? A place where they don't just survive, they actually thrive. You have to ask, are we just feeding the very beast we're trying to starve?